So here we are again, another great pedestrian adventure. Just crossing the street here, the main bridge intersection here, Rock Falls. And want to be looking at the scripture there where St. Thomas, he doubts and doesn't believe when Christ returns, and then Christ has to show him his side there, and show him where the nails went through his hands, and so that's what we're going to be looking at today. One of the things to note here is that we get into the situation where sometimes that's how it is with us, obviously, that maybe Christ appeared to everybody else, and then people just kind of came to a consensus, and they all were able to come to the conclusion that yes, this is Jesus, but then we're kind of off, not part of the group sometimes at the time, and then we come in and we're like, you know what, I'm not going to believe until people tell us about it, and we're like, I'm not going to believe until I put my hands in the side, and until I see for myself, kind of thing. And one of the things to note here is this is where we usually get the concept of a doubting Thomas. Now, one of the things that I find that's interesting about this is that when we look at the situation and we think about the situation carefully, one of the things that we see here is that there's a place for doubt. I mean, sometimes we can be in a situation where we don't want to be believing something that's totally false and have some kind of charismatic leader, so to speak. And I hate to use the term charismatic in that way, but some sort of forceful leader telling us what to believe, and we're all just supposed to believe it, and then if we have any questions with that, then well, they're going to tell you just have faith, and just have faith. And sometimes the stuff they may want you to believe is just total hogwash. I mean, I hate to say that, but that's what we want to try to avoid here. We want to try to avoid situations where people are trying to get us to believe in stuff that's totally false, because we want to believe in what's true. And that's where Christ was willing to go the extra steps there, and to show his hands, and show the side where he was pierced. And St. Thomas was actually able to put his hands into the side of Christ and feel the place where the nails went on Christ, and know that Jesus had indeed risen from the dead. Now, getting back here to this idea, blessed are those who believe who have not seen. This is kind of important because one of the things that it shows us is that it's not always more of Christ, that having more of Christ in our life that makes us blessed, or that really is a good thing. I mean, sure, Jesus is God in the flesh, and don't get me wrong and everything, but it seems always good to have more Jesus than less Jesus. But there's a sense in which St. Thomas, if he was satisfied, if he was able to come to the conclusion, honestly, that Jesus had indeed risen from the dead, based upon the testimony of others, that Jesus had risen from the dead, then he would be blessed. Blessed are those who believe, who have not seen. And one of the things this makes me reflect upon is that there was a particular nun that the story was that she'd be served the Eucharist there, and there would be different sized pieces, and she would always get the big piece. That was sort of her custom there, to get the big piece of the Eucharist. And I guess one day she was content with the small piece and not the big piece. She took a pass at the big piece. Instead, she went with the small piece. And by so doing, what happened there, by going with the small piece instead of the big piece, is that she was able to achieve what's, I guess, considered the mystical union with God, so that she was able to be united rather perfectly with God through Christ, as I understand it. And so, that experience, from what I understand, would not have happened if not for the fact that the saint was taking the little piece and was able to be content with the little piece, as opposed to requiring the big piece of the Eucharist. Now, that's something to reflect upon. You would think that being a saint would mean that a person would always be taking the big piece of Christ, that they would always be taking more of Jesus, they'd always be just consuming more and more of Jesus. But and as much as they possibly could, that the more Jesus in your life, the more saintly you become, as some might think. But that may not be so. Just like St. Thomas. St. Thomas, he's touching Jesus, in his side, and touching Jesus where Jesus had been nailed to the cross. And some might think, he's got more experience with Jesus. He's touching the side, and he's touching the holes on Jesus' hands or wrists, and so he's more saintly than the other saints, and because he's got more of Jesus. And some people would think this way. But that whole idea, blessed are those who believe, who have not seen, who have not seen but believe, basically. And that whole idea there shows that there's more to the story, that really it shows more faith. And I know that when I look at the situation and I think about it, there's different, different levels of faith, as it were, if I want to call it that. Maybe that's not really right to say, and there are people that really stand firm on the promises of God, that the promises of God go out, and they use those, and they base their lives and their hope on those promises. They rest their assurance on those promises. And so that happens by faith. But then there are others that don't just do that, but do that in the will of God. So there are those that they don't want to just rest their hope and their faith on any promise of God under their own selfish will and ambition, but instead, some people they want to have a will and ambition that matches the will of God before they rest their hope and faith on the promises of God, so that they're not resting their hope and faith on promises of God for selfish ambitions. You don't want to be treating Jesus like Santa Claus, let's say. Sometimes it's maybe not appropriate to treat Jesus as Santa Claus, because he's not Santa Claus. He's Jesus Christ. And Christ will basically judge over everything, in a sense. He's both the teacher and judge over all, as the ancient Byzantine icon shows. And so, when we look at some of these things and we think about them, one of the things that we get to here is that there's a purpose when we see that Christ is both teacher and judge over all. There's a purpose in doing God's will. There's a purpose in meditating and trying to see what God's will is, and then shaping our will accordingly, so that when we rest on God's promises through faith in Christ, that we do so in such a way that is appropriate and pleasing to God for the glory of God the Father. That it's not just a lamp, where somebody rubs the lantern and then a genie pops out and then there's 3 wishes. It's not like that. Some people think that that's how prayer should go, and I'll tell you, like we pray for people. People ask us to pray for them. We pray for people, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I know that there was a saint that she even said or written that people would come to her and pray, and they would ask for riches or whatever it would be from God, and she would pray with them, and she'd be like, I pray because they asked me, but I just think it kind of goes on deaf ears, and because some of that stuff, God's just not so interested in. And there's nothing wrong with having wealth. It's nice to have wealth, but keep in mind here that God's understanding of wealth and what wealth is different than our understanding as humans, as simple humans, sometimes, of what wealth is. I know that back in the ancient times, I remember when I studied classical civilization there, and there at a secular school, one of the things that I learned that really is, so to speak, stuck with me over the decades is that the ancient people, they when they the ancient people, when they thought about wealth, they they thought about somebody having more livestock. You know, they thought about somebody having more of something, and not necessarily a lot of times having a better quality, but just having more. You know, like I mentioned before, this is a parallel that I've drawn. A sheep, you know, I think 1,000 sheep on 1,000 hills kind of thing. You know, there's more that a person owns. There's a sense in which when you get into farming, the more grain that acres of farmland you own, the richer you're going to be. I mean, because the more land, the more that's going to be produced, and the more that's produced, the more money you make. So there, you know, there's a sense in which that still holds true today in a lot of regards. But I know that I kind of knew a guy years ago and didn't really know him super well, but you know, I remember I talked to him a lot and stuff, and he seemed to be a really nice guy. And one of the things there is I didn't know it until people explained to me, but apparently the guy was a millionaire, and you know, he had a dirt floor and whatnot at his home, and he was a happy man. But he was only a millionaire in the fact that if he sold his farm, which he inherited, then he would be a millionaire. So, you know, without selling the farm, he's not a millionaire, you know, but because he owns a farm, there's a sense in which, I mean, he's equivalent to a millionaire. So he has his dirt floor, and, you know, he has his place and lives in simplicity and as happy can be. And there's certainly nothing wrong with that, but people wouldn't consider him to be a rich man if they knew him, you know. But only those that knew that he owned, you know, a tremendous amount of land, and that the land was worth something, only those people would say, hey, you know, that guy's a rich man. And but in the ancient world, I think it would have been far more obvious that if you own a huge portion of land, I mean, everybody would have been like, yeah, you know, that's a rich man. And today, though, things are different, you know. Today, people look at you, and if you got a really nice car, then you're considered a rich man. If you got, you know, a lot of times a really nice house, people look at your house and they think, oh, he's got a really nice house, he's a rich man. People sometimes look at a person's job and they say, oh, that person's got a real nice job, they're a rich man. You know, they look at other factors like that, and they say, oh, this person's a rich man. I know from my experience there with, you know, sales, and, you know, I've heard it from not just sales, but, you know, I've had economics classes and whatnot, and, you know, and had classes with people that sold financial securities, and I've even trained at a brokerage firm and stuff like that. So I kind of know some things about wealth, and not really a full expert on everything, not really a full expert on wealth per se, but at least not in every aspect. But one of the things that I learned there that's kind of important is that And this has been said by different people in different contexts. It's something that I've taken to be generally true. This is something that people have not just parroted from other people, but it's something that people have found by observation. And that is to say that the people that are truly wealthy and financially well-to-do, they're people that you wouldn't know it. They're people that they have the money in the account, and they got maybe an okay house, and they have maybe a conservative lifestyle where they got the huge sum of money in their account, but they're not really wealthy people, as the world would see it. They're not people that have a giant Porsche or some kind of expensive Mercedes or something like that that's new, or some new vehicle that costs a fortune. They're people that just go around in blue jeans and that sort of thing, and sometimes if they want to buy a nice vehicle or something, they do, but they have plenty to spare after they do. And then there's another crowd that they're different from that. They don't really have the resources, but instead what they do is they use all their resources they can to be like those that are rich, or to show themselves as being rich. And so here they are, and they're trying to buy some expensive vehicle they can't afford, and here they are, and they're trying to buy some giant house they can't afford, something that somebody that'd be really rich could buy the house and have plenty to spare. And so when the really rich look at it, they're like, well, yeah, it looks like a nice house, I'll buy that. But when people that are not rich, but they're trying to maybe be like the rich, look at it, they're like, oh, I'm going to buy that huge house, and they have this vision of wealth and whatnot, and maybe grandeur, if it were, and being like a wannabe rich man. And so they buy it, and then they can't really afford it, and they're living off of like ramen noodles or whatever. I know I had an economics professor that always talked about ramen noodles. He would always talk about when the ramen noodles would come in a person's life, and you learned a lot about economics in the way that he talked about ramen noodles, and when you ate ramen noodles and when you didn't. And I mean, besides markets, of course, and supply and demand, but I know that when we look at the subject in depth here and we really think about it, there's a lot to be said in this regard, that some people, they don't just have like a little bit. Sometimes they have a lot. Sometimes they have millions, millions of dollars worth of assets, and that's not bad. It's their business. But there's a sense in which, getting back to the subject here, people that sometimes, and I'm not saying that you should, forsake Christ for riches. That's not what I'm saying at all. But sometimes people that are content with less of Christ so that other people can have more of him. Some people that are content with having the some people that are content with believing without seeing. They're just content because the testimony of what others have said they know is true, and so they're content with that, and they don't need to have Jesus come and show them. I mean, sometimes that in itself can be a great blessing, and sometimes it can be well worth it, but I guess relating that to wealth, I mean, there's a sense in which it's a little bit similar to what I was talking about with wealth, in that the people that basically know they're wealthy but don't have to show it. They don't have to extend themselves out. They always keep themselves where they got plenty to spare. Those people, they're blessed. They're blessed, as opposed to those that like try to basically keep up with the other wealthy people and extend all their resources to the point where they're poor, when really they're just basically using what little God has given them to sort of project a really massive huge image that is not quite right. And like a big house and a really super nice car, having that to really pump up the image, when really, I mean, it's coming at a huge sacrifice. Sometimes people are maybe sacrificing some meals out, and they're sacrificing some like money they can be using with their family, and they're sacrificing a lot to have a huge image, and that's where like I say, the super wealthy or the wealthier people, they might have the same things even, but they got plenty to spare because they don't buy the really super nice things to portray a huge image. They just buy what's within their means, and they got plenty to spare, and if they had less money, they would buy things that were even less and still have plenty to spare, and there's a different mentality there in that. So some of that too, I mean, like, we don't want to be partaking of Christ so extensively that it becomes like a situation where we're showing the world that we're like the greatest monk or the greatest nun or the greatest clergyman or whatever, that we're just like consuming all of Jesus, and so that nobody else can have him, and we're just like hoarding all of Jesus, and that may not be right. It just kind of can be projecting a greater image than what's really necessary, and I know in all my time and going to college and whatnot, I mean, there are a lot of times that I've actually not portrayed myself like as fully as what I've gone to school for and whatnot. But then what happens, or what's happened to me before, is when I'd go and look at jobs and stuff like that, and talk to people in management positions about jobs and whatnot, then they wouldn't believe I went to school for so long, and they wouldn't believe that this and that. I mean, this is stuff that can be verified by transcripts, but a lot of times people, I mean, they don't care to do that. And so then I'd be losing opportunities because it's almost like losing opportunities because I wasn't really putting myself out there enough, and projecting the image enough. But that's where if I drove in with a really nice car or something like that, or wore a suit, people would be like, he's got some really nice degrees, even if I don't, and I do have really nice degrees. But if I didn't, if I just had a suit and like a nice car, then people would be like, you know what, he he's got what it takes, and he's got the knowledge and the degrees and everything else. And sometimes those people, they don't. I know that when I was at community college there, the guy that was the most brilliant instructor out of all the instructors at the college, like he wore clothes from the thrift store. That's the truth. And they weren't like really, really nice clothes from the thrift store. They were the things that were affordable from the thrift store. And that's how he dressed every day. And wasn't bad at all. Wasn't bad at all. It showed the world, as it were. It showed everybody that just because you got a suit and tie on, it doesn't mean that you know more. I mean, it doesn't mean that you're like, it's just basically packaging. And sometimes people, they put the suit and the tie on, and it's just like a real elaborate shell. It's like a real elaborate decoration, and what's on the inside can be just totally bogus. It can be kind of like with the Pharisees there, where they wash the outside of the cup, but they don't wash the inside of the cup. So the cup on the inside is just filthy, but the cup on the outside is washed clean. And so it looks clean on the outside, but on the inside it's anything but clean. And that's why Jesus also called them whitewashed sepulchres. That they were kind of like on the inside full of dead men's bones and all kinds of unclean things, and on the inside, but on the outside they're whitewashed to look like they were just kind of perfect, and that's why when we look at the suit and the tie, and we look at dressing real nice, that's good to do only after we've had the education, and we've done everything on the inside. We got the skills, the training, whatever it is. We have everything on the inside right. Then that's where the suit and tie comes in as like a final like a very final touch, finishing touch, as it were. That's where the suit and tie is a finishing touch. But it's not supposed to be that somebody comes out really messed up. They put on a suit and a tie, and then they go to work, and then people hire him, or goes to an employer and people hire him. It's not supposed to be like that. And anyway, to make a long story short, you are blessed if you believe without having seen, because you're basically I guess, conserving even on what Jesus has to do. The same way too, like with the saint that took less of Christ's Eucharist when normally she would take more. By taking less Eucharist, it kind of conserves on what Jesus has to do. And that's also too, like where Jesus died on the cross, and we can conserve on what Jesus had to do for us. We're just so much better off because there are other people that can use more Jesus, that really need him, and really need more of him. And it almost sounds counterintuitive. It sounds like it's like there's something, it sounds like there's something not quite right about that, because in the world we're always taught more is better. That's one of the principles there in economics, that more is better. If you have more of something, like more of Jesus, more is better. But there's a sense in which more isn't always better. That less can be better. I'm not saying completely not having is best. I'm not saying that at all. But what I am saying is that if we take as much Jesus as what we need from the cross and the crucifixion, but we conserve the rest for others, I mean, that goes a long way, because we're showing more reverence for Christ's sacrifice then, and not less. We're showing more reverence for the needs of others, and not less, and we're showing more of our understanding of our part in the body of Christ, and not less, because it shows that we understand, like, when we're full, and when it's like eating. We understand when we're full, and we don't go beyond that, but we eat to the point where we are full, so we're not starving ourselves of Jesus, because you don't want to starve yourself of Jesus, so we eat to the point where we're full, but then we don't eat to the point where we're overfull of Jesus. We save some for others, and we make sure others get some as well, especially by saving some for others. And so there's a lot to this, but anyway, God be praised, God bless, and God keep you and love you forever. Thank you, and bye for now.